Welcome to my introduction of Section 4, which is about designing prep sheets and reflections specifically for teamwork. Now, I touched on prep sheets a little bit earlier in my introduction of teamwork, but I'm going to go into a lot more depth, and in particular, I'm going to describe to you the prep sheets that I have hyperlinked here. Some of which are mine, some of which belong to my colleagues at CVU. So before I start opening these prep sheets and describing what I think is notable about them, I think what's important to understand, and you may hear my dog doing some things in the background here. What's important to understand about prep sheets is that they are different than a typical worksheet in that they are, as the name suggests, prepping the student for the discussion. Your content is absolutely a big part of the prep sheet, but it's important that when you're designing a prep sheet, you're thinking about what do you want the discussion to sound like? What do you want to be the content of the discussion? How do you want the students to drive the discussion? We know that in group work, typically students will fill out a worksheet and they will write their answers to prompts, and then they'll get together and they'll say, I got this for question 1 and this for question 2 and this for question 3. And then they'll listen patiently as the other students do the same. A prep sheet goes deeper by asking them to generate curiosity, and think about what they want to learn from their team. So let's get into it. So this first prep sheet right here is a prep sheet that I designed for a teamwork activity about the Taylor Swift song Peace. This is not for a class that I teach. This is actually for, well, that's not true. This is for a group of Harkness student leaders that I typically work with in helping them understand how teamwork operates. So I almost always in my prep sheets have an individual work section, which you can think of as a typical worksheet. So I'm asking them a few questions about their reactions to the song. But here, very important piece right here. What clarifying and probing questions do you have for your teammates? So immediately you're asking them to think about their teammates. It's not just about them. What are you curious to learn about? That's so important. You can see that we have a prompt. What is Swift saying about fame in this song? Golden lines. This is a sort of a Harkness terminology. What are the pieces of text that best help you answer the prompt? So they're writing down text. They're getting ready to talk about text. A meaningful teamwork activity and a meaningful Harkness discussion is one that is rooted in your content. It's not just kids pulling in anecdotes from their life and sort of shooting from the hip. No, they're thinking about your content. So they should be ready to bring up your content. You should give them that opportunity in a prep sheet. So individual work right here, and then we get into teamwork. So I have described the roles. They will decide who will enact those roles. Good thing to note here about roles is very typically, unless I say something, when kids are asked to pick roles, what will happen is that they'll do the nose game, or they'll just do it. They'll literally just like grab roles based on what they want, which is really frustrating as you're collaborating with people because it's not inquisitive at all. It's not thoughtful about what the team wants. That's all about what the individual wants. So I always would start a teamwork and remind my class, listen, What's a great way to poison the vibe in your team right from the jump is to play nose game about who's going to do what role. The right way to do that, if you're looking for a suggestion, would be to ask, hey, who would like to do what role? So then step 2 of this prep sheet is to just do as kids typically do with a worksheet. Just listen to the responses. Just hear what people have written down on their prep sheet. Then we get into what makes this a teamwork activity. Again, group work, we're writing down our thoughts, we're sharing them. Teamwork, we're writing down our thoughts, we're sharing them, we're making something new. So this outlines what the team must make that is new using this song. So let's look at another example. Here is a prep sheet from, I believe this is a ninth grade teacher who is having her students read an excerpt from, I believe the author's name is Harari, the book Sapiens. So again, we have group work. Students are writing down their individual thoughts, but we have process-oriented questions. What text would you like to bring up? What is a discussion that you would like to ask the group? What are you curious about? And this one, I think wisely, this is a great step, has a reflection right here. So this is a good opportunity to talk about reflection. As I said in the introduction to teamwork, if it's going to be teamwork and you're building towards Harkness discussion, I think it is vital to have a reflection. So that means you need to save the time and you need to be thoughtful about what it is you want to do with those reflections. If they're just filling them out and then they're immediately going in the recycling, the kids will get wise to that. They're not going to take it seriously. They will not benefit from any of the metacognition that you're hoping they benefit from. So this is a great question that asks them to reflect on content, which you should definitely do. But now they're thinking about the soft skills and they're thinking about their own performance. They're thinking about the nature of Harkness discussion and they're thinking about the group. These are all great questions to ask. And so here is another prep sheet, probably from the activity the very next day. Okay, let's move on. All right, let's leave the humanities world. There's precious few. I need to do a much better job of bringing in non-humanities material. And that means that I need to solicit its production. But that's a whole other topic. So here is a cool example of a prep sheet in math. So again, we have a goal for the discussion. We have the types of soft skills that are important to consider during the teamwork. And we have a word problem. So based on that, we have a prep sheet. What do you wonder about this problem? What would you like to ask your team when you get together? Now, this is important. When folks get confused, as they do in all subjects, but as someone who struggled in math mightily, I know that this can happen in math. And what's tricky about math, which isn't always the case in the humanities, is that you're usually working in an arena where there's a right and a wrong answer. And that can cause kids to get really nervous because their success or lack thereof at finding that right answer can sort of color them in the eyes of their classmates. And that has a bunch of unforeseen side effects, not the least of which is that kids shut down. They shrink away from collaboration because they don't want to be perceived as struggling or unable. So I really prompt students, and this is one that I made for my students, think before we start, how are you going to help someone if they seem lost? And then what math strategies might you try to use? Prep sheets are highly customizable, and they're, in my view, the most important tool of accommodation and differentiation within the Harkness process. I almost always am handing out at least 2 different versions of a prep sheet to reach different student needs and different student abilities. This prep sheet, I think, also wisely includes sentence stems. So these are things that kids might, these are phrases that kids might use. Okay, so here's an example of the teamwork. And in this case, they're writing process. How did you solve the problem? They're writing out the math. And here is an example of, and I'll actually, let's put a pin in this. This is a teamwork reflection that I'll go over shortly. Okay, I've already shown you the TLO ethical dilemma. Let's just look at this and then we'll look at a reflection. Okay, so this is an ethical dilemma. Ethical dilemmas are really excellent tools for teamwork because obviously ethics. People have different approaches to the ethics, and they really provide students with the opportunity to dig. Why do you feel that way? What experiences have you had that made you feel that way? That's different than how I feel. So disagreement can happen in ethical dilemma. And it's great for kids to practice disagreeing respectfully. So here's a dilemma about plagiarizing. The kids are imagining that they are the English teacher who has a student who has plagiarized. Individual work right here. And then the team has to come up with some sort of agreement, some sort of policy or procedure. So pretty cut and dry. All right, let's look at some reflections. And then I'm almost done. So here is the stock paper individual teamwork reflection that I use. Takes 7 minutes to complete. Kids are ranking various things. And then there's some short answer. Shout outs. I can't believe I made it this far without mentioning that teamwork is a great opportunity to have kids shout each other out. I almost always end teamwork before they go into either before they start reflecting or immediately after they reflect. I have kids do public shout outs. And man, if a kid who is not friends with another kid, but who was just sort of genuinely impacted by what that student did, shouts out that student publicly, I mean, that's not a thing that students get to experience very frequently. And it really injects a feeling of sincerity and connectedness in the room. So shout outs, I can't advocate doing shout outs enough. And so, maybe you have students note their shout out on the reflection first and then share out right before the bell rings, something like that. Lastly, here is the same reflection, but it is a good way to weave in if you're going to assess discussion, which not everybody does. We'll have a whole section on assessment. This is a great opportunity to make them aware of your scale. And 1 second. Hold on. Hold that thought. Still here. It's a great opportunity to make folks aware of your scale. And then you could go on and do the typical reflections. So reflections, you can weave in all different kinds of things. But hopefully I've been able to convey how prep sheets operate and how reflections operate within the context of teamwork.